back, Walter. Welcome back, us. Thank you, everybody, for being patient. And sorry for the 2 week hiatus. The SS Taibbi kind of ran aground a little bit there for a moment. Uh, and, don't worry about it too much, but we're back. And, we made a few adjustments, some of which I think we had to do because the extra show on Monday we really created for the purposes of the election, and I wanted to make this move to try out novels too, and so we're gonna see how that works out today, and this Monday show is essentially going to be an excuse to add a little bit more of the story stuff that we have so enjoyed doing over the last couple of years. But we're also going to talk about some news. And Walter, it's been, as usual, kind of a nutty couple of weeks.
Well,
Um,
you see, Matt, I'm used to draining the tub twice a week, and not being able to do that for 2 weeks has caused it to back up and flood, my apartment. Uh, so, if you would ask me about anything that happened more than 4 days ago, I can't
or
tell
four
you.
minutes ago,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah, it's just like an overflowing basement.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we almost went to war with Russia, or maybe at some point in the last few days, Putin and the Russian leadership have decided to go to continuity of government
Operations, yeah.
operations. Before that, we missed Trump's entire Middle Eastern trip, I think, all the sword dancing and the hair whipping. And, it was like a medieval state, Islamic state fair. Um, and
And
so
we either were or weren't, or were and then weren't, or were and then are about to be at war with Iran also.
Right. Well, I think we've almost made peace with them 7 times in the last 2 weeks. See, what I love about Trump is that he gives you the kind of updates that, like, your friend gives on their relationship, where they say, "We're really happy right now. We're about to go on vacation. I think we're going to get married." And then 2 days later, they say, "It's just not working. I don't feel like we communicate anymore." And then 2 days later, it's, "Oh my God, we had the best time the other night. I think it's going to work." And so this is genius, because by giving you too much information far too often, you start to get very calm about everything. You know, you just
Yeah.
even it out. It's a sine wave, and finally you just draw a straight line: peace, war, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting a little bit zen about it. There's actually a line in the book we're gonna do today, "A Quiet American" by Graham Greene, that perfectly encapsulates how I feel about the entire process. It's all about, you know, I don't care anymore. I just don't want to participate. Um,
Well, Matt, I mean, you got to summarize our little hiatus. I'll put it this way: um, Matt decided, and I not only assented to, but began to see the beauty of, that we might go a little deeper, that we were riding the foam, the very crest of the silly social media driven news cycle, and that trying to keep up with that and trying to make sense of it was kind of a losing battle. So we've decided to sort of dive down beneath the waves, pick a longer and deeper literary selection than we've been doing, and sort of stack our news stuff according to theme in a way that we can learn and you can learn something slightly abiding, and we don't have to play ball with these people at every moment of the day. You know, their crises, their hysterias, their manufactured problems, and though I think the show will be maybe less, hectically up to the moment, I think it will be more rewarding for people.
yeah, and we also are going to bring on a little bit of extra help. Greg Collard, who started working for us at Racket, he's going to be helping out with some producing too. So we're gonna have a little bit more backup, a little bit more research when we dive into things, and we won't be, as you say, Walter, we won't be so reactive. It'll be stuff we want to do, and we'll get into it as deeply as we want, and for as long as we want, and hopefully, that'll be more fun. So
Maybe we can end up actually driving the news cycle because by being the only two people in media who can concentrate on anything, you know, maybe others will start to key off us, and you will see that by discussing the Quiet American, for example, for a couple of weeks, it will start popping up also, on MSNBC, like the American Diplomat and Quiet American, and you're going to find out that this isn't just far from reactive. This is an attempt to set the agenda using literature.
well, I think we already are. A, a, a certain unnamed, I will say, New York Times columnist, I think, wrote a column a little bit in reaction to us last week, but I won't get into that too much. I'm speculating, but I think
Right.
I think there's a little bit of reaction that happens to the show. So,
Good.
but anyway, we're back. I'm sorry I screwed up, and I missed everybody, and we've got lots of fun stuff to talk about today, including a book that both Walter and I forgot. We just forgot how great this book was, and so that's part of the fun of this too. Is that we've been talking about short stories, and some of these novels, there's so much work put into them, and especially by writers. Well, we'll get into that later, but this is a great one we're gonna do today.
But
Uh,
one technical piece of advice for our listeners. I was able to buy The Quiet American for $2.99 in an electronic edition, which looks quite nice. It has the sort of dull paper-like screen, and though it's a little bit of an investment for people, it's really worth it to build this library because we're going to pick books that we think are of abiding interest, not just fun, not just of the moment. And I think following along, trying to get a head start on it, we'll announce them as early as possible, is really going to reward people. It's better than what they used to call the Learning Annex in New York, or one of these, cheap literature classes, masterpieces of the 20th century.
right.
You're going to get an education, and by the end of a few months and a year or so, we're going to all have a body of references together that we can use both as hosts and audience, and that's going to be unique.
Yeah, I think it'll really help, especially since a lot of the books that we're gonna pick, that we will pick, will have relevance to the current moment. This one, again, uncannily, is in this news cycle, on a couple levels. It has a lot of Harvard in it. It has a lot of democracy promotion, American foreign policy, but we'll get to all that in a moment. Before we get to Harvard, which is very much in the news, um, when Walter first started getting on the Luigi Manion thing a while back, inwardly I was like, where's he going with this? Like I wasn't exactly sure, and but you know, you've been on this Nostradamus kick for at least a year now, and you continually prove me incorrect in my assumption that these aren't stories that are going to develop in a certain way, and the Luigi story keeps going in all these bizarre directions and horrible directions. We've now had a couple of legit copycat type
Hmm.
episodes. But now we've had this really weird media episode that I'm not sure how to feel about. But the video from it is just incredible. So Wired magazine last week. I'm not even sure what the headline in the story was. If we can throw that up, if we have it, let's take a look. But essentially, um, one of their writers. Yeah, here it is. It's Andy Greenberg is the writer, and it's sort of an anarchist cookbook how to make Luigi Mangione's 3D printed gun, and um, so the punchline, and you know, he's a good writer. He's good at what he does. Apparently, he made uh, like an AR-15 or something a long time ago. I forget what it was, but the one of the quotes from the article is creating a ghost gun with a 3D printer in America today is not only easier and more practical than ever. In most of the U.S., it also remains entirely legal, as long as he was making it for his own use and not selling it or transferring it to anyone else. Uh, so that should freak you out a little bit, but that's before you even get to the video. So let's take a look at I guess it's SOT 4 right here. This is the video of Greenberg talking about what they're gonna do, how they make the gun.
We're about to see how much that question of reliability has changed over the years. Okay, let's get started. Hopefully this whole experiment will literally blow up in my face.
So they have this conceit that like they hope it doesn't work. They hope
The next
it's not
morning,
this
I
easy.
returned to check on the 3D printed frames. This is pretty wild. Like, these things look like actual gun parts. So this looks like a big block, but all of this is support structure that just holds up the top of the frame here. So once I crack this off, oh yeah, I don't need to even clean anything out of this internal cavity here. This just looks almost like commercially made. It's so clean on the inside. It's just really impressive what a 3D printer can do today, overnight.
So we pause there. He goes on to introduce sort of a co-character who's an internet YouTuber who goes by the handle Print Shoot Repeat, and then they do a test, and that's SOT 5.
I might look calm on the surface, but to be honest, I'm sweating a little bit. It's a strange moment when this kind of abstract and technical series of steps finally comes together, and you remember that you've created something really powerful and quite dangerous. In fact, the exact gun that appears to have killed a man on the streets of Manhattan last year. So for this first shot, I'm gonna just hold it to the side from the hip, just in case this slide flies off the 3D printed frame and goes backwards at a high speed. Moment of truth. Wow.
How'd we do? Intact?
Totally.
Nice. Decently
Nice.
tight for supersonic ammunition as well.
Well, let's load it up again.
All right.
Nice.
No. Let's see.
Having trouble.
The
It's
misfire.
not-
So I guess what's happening here is that the suppressor is preventing it from cycling properly.
Yes. What's happening is the slide's coming forward, but
All right.
probably not quite enough
we can
to
stop.
strike.
I have so much to say, man.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Just real quickly. So after most shootings, school shootings, mass shootings, and so on, we get a season of deploring the Second Amendment, American fascination with guns, the sad waste of lives. But for some reason, the Luigi Mangione case becomes
Uh-oh.
looking hosts you've ever seen. A guy who made me nervous when he picked up a gun, and I'm behind a computer screen. So now it's cool. Now it's kind of fascinating tech story for urban types. Maybe they'll meet down at Think Coffee here in Manhattan and compare their 3D printing experiences and go out to the range together. They're opening up a whole new nerdy world of left-wing approval, what they call a permission structure around firearms. But of course, it's ritualistic. It's not sincere. They're not suddenly pro-gun and pro, Second Amendment.
Well, so the end of the story is capped off with an interview about sort of the moral implications. There's another
Right.
commentator who talks about how do we prevent this? You know, how can we keep people from using this incredibly easy tool to make
that we just showed them
you
how to
make.
use,
Yeah.
and that we just gave them a step-by-step guide to learning about on the internet. Here's the thing about guns, and I live out in Montana, and I grew up around them, and I've got plenty of them, and I've got stories to tell. But every time I take a guy like that guy and take him out shooting, something happens. He has an incredible amount of fun. He experiences for the first time in his powerless little laptop life what it's like to project ballistic power at a target and watch it get a hole in it or even blow up if it's a pumpkin or a radio or an old TV like the targets I like to use. There's something absolutely infectious about firearms. And they decided to go ahead and be infectious. And they can tack a Surgeon General's warning on the end or a little moralistic preacheroo, but they just broke the seal on, skinny jeans and Glocks.
Right.
And who's to say where it will go? And why did they do this? They did it in honor of America's anarchist, Luigi. And everyone now is invited to role play, I think, in a way they weren't before. And I don't think they're going to be able to go back to the fulsome virtue signaling, Second Amendment objecting drag that they've been.
Yeah, I mean, they're too clearly having fun.
Right.
In one of the videos, they managed to get themselves to. There's a quote. It's like when you remove the suppressor, it functions as a fully semi-automatic firearm, and it's like a Tarantino movie. It's like, and they're both getting off on it in the video, and
So
watching it, you're
remem-
kind of stoked too, until you realize that this is really about creating a fully legal, unlicensed weapon that you can use to go shoot just about anybody. So,
but they're not new, and God forbid there are plenty of non 3D printed guns in America. The number that are going to be made by this method, and their relative unreliability compared to the Sig Sauer that you get in the package, and it's frickin' perfect. Okay, the NATO 9mm right off the bat killing machine. So, but what they did here is they took like barbering, they took the beard culture, they took the culture of like Filson and Carhartt, and they put it all together, the Timberland boots, and they made it an accessory. And how they de-accessorize it, I don't know.
yeah, no, they're even kind of excited at one moment because they talk about how the part that Luigi had to file down was not the 3D printed part, but the crappy commercially made part that they had to add.
Right.
So they're excited about how well the 3D printing. So Xerox and guns, good. I mean, it just brought to mind the old anarchist cookbook thing and how that I just remember that being controversial once upon a time. Apparently not. So
If anyone wants to go to my Twitter account, you will see that back in, I believe, February or early March, I noted and have a picture of the Anarchist Cookbook in a very fancy Bozeman, Montana
that's
bookstore,
awesome.
surrounded by pride flags. Okay, so Luigi obviously has made Tiger Beat revolutionary, Dreamboat killing people cool. But here's the question, because people don't realize my madness on this subject. You alluded to it in the beginning. I saw Luigi from the minute it happened as a thematically charged, prepackaged, mimetic narrative for our time that was not organic, that was either the work of one guy who's really, really good at programming media, and that would be Luigi, or who knows, a team. Because the ghost gun featured in the very first video, and the first day of Luigi Mania was everyone speculating on, was he a pro, or was he a pro assassin, or was he an amateur? And it all centered on why he had to such trouble with the gun.
Well,
And
but he didn't though. What they're pointing out is that he was actually anticipating the problem with the recoil or whatever it was.
exactly. And you know, and my overwhelming Nostradamus prediction about Luigi is that his case is designed to explode like a bad ghost gun. He will get off. We are watching the making of a celebrity who will be as free as David Hogg or Greta, you know, whatever, someday. But that he used a ghost gun was one of the immediate tip-offs to me that the whole thing was a bit of a, you know, was a bit of a staged game. It happens, and they mention this in the article, that in March there was a Supreme Court case about the legality of suppressors on ghost guns. Oh, wow. Well, Supreme Court cases are scheduled in advance, and I happen to know one of the avatars, mavens, forerunners of 3D printed firearms, a guy I know down in Austin, Texas. And this has been on the docket for a while. Oh, it just happens that in December, the first big assassination or even murder using a 3D printed suppressor, because remember, the gun is already legal in a lot of places, but these accessories might not be. How interesting that you would front run a Supreme Court case over one of your firearms accessories with an assassination on video, which features the operations of the gun, such that we can now, it now segues into a set of there are 3 wired videos that you can go to right now, the adventures of this ghost gun.
Yeah, no, we should all have them. It's like that, I forget which Sean Penn movie, Casualties of War. Everybody should be armed always. That's where we're heading. Okay, so that happened. I mean, look, I strongly, just for the shock value, recommend watching the Wired stuff and reading that article. We're just going to quickly touch on the sort of contours of the Harvard controversy, because it's really oddly at the center of kind of the American conversation, despite the fact that we have all this stuff going on around the world that would seem to be of equal or perhaps even greater import. But look, it's a major showdown, constitutional showdown, speech showdown. We talked about it earlier in the year. It's essentially the same story. In the same way that Columbia backed down, Harvard is kind of not.
I think it's far more. It's not just a speech issue anymore, Matt.
No,
I mean, Chris Rufo, who's sort of the activist, conservative activist spearheading a lot of this, has made it a civil rights issue. It has to do with hiring. It has to do with admissions. It has to do with, all sorts of protocols and procedures on the campus. So it's really a holistic look at the operations of Harvard University in terms of civil rights, speech, and finance.
Yes, I'm with you.
And now foreign students.
And
which isn't just a speech issue either, because it's come up now that they're making a lot of money off of China and Chinese tuition, and there's a espionage angle that's been introduced. Whether it's relevant or not, who knows? I mean,
yeah. So the Trump administration though has gone a little nuts in how they're dealing with this, and if politics were college courses and one of them each semester was Trumpian politics, I would probably get a C in it every year, because I consistently fail to understand or see angles with what they're trying to do. Sometimes I can't tell whether they're trolling or whether they mean it. Whether they're trying to force Harvard into an unpopular decision or a no-win situation. But one of the major headlines right now is about a letter that was sent by Kristi Noem from DHS to Harvard that has this long list of demands that kind of goes far beyond anything that one would expect. Okay, so here she talks about how on April 16th, they requested records pertaining to non-immigrant students enrolled at Harvard, including information regarding misconduct and other offenses that would render foreign students inadmissible or removable. On April 30th, Harvard's counsel provided information that he represented as responsive. It was not. And then if we scroll down even further, there is a thing that talks about, it's really number 2 here. I expect full and complete responses to the following requests. Any and all records, whether official or informal, in the possession of Harvard University, including electronic records and audio and video footage regarding dangerous or violent activity, whether on or off campus, by a non-immigrant student enrolled in Harvard University in the last 5 years. So they're asking Harvard, in order to keep your money, not only do you have to, provide all this information on immigrant enrollment, other things, you also have to send footage of things like protests by non-immigrant students enrolled at Harvard. So, look, this is almost certainly violative of the First Amendment. Like, if they just shut the money off, there would be no problem. But we've talked about this, Walter. The Trump administration is not big on fig leaves. They want you to see what's under the fig leaf, and and so rather than do this the way, the Biden administration would, where they would just cut the money off, or
No, but Matt, the Biden administration wouldn't touch Harvard.
no, they wouldn't touch Harvard.
The Biden
I'm saying
administration has faded into the woodwork at Harvard. I don't know if it's Jake or who, but they've taken the well-worn path of their foreign policy experts going to the Kennedy School or to other Harvard departments and so on, and lying in wait for the next administration. I mean, I really disagree, not about the overreach, in the sense that, providing films of your campus protests to the government. No, you come take them. If you're allowed, and you're not allowed.
Right.
That would be my answer to that. But in general, Harvard as a target, Harvard as a subject, Harvard as a theme, and its practices and its, function in society is genius. I say genius politics.
The politics of it, it's clear as day. There's
but
like
not
five.
but not just in terms of winning over a populist, faction. These institutions sit at the very heart of American life, and they operate almost as the church did in medieval times. Like the church, you give money to them and you kind of get credit in secular heaven. Like the church, they don't pay taxes. Like the church, when they have the Jesuitical or titles behind them, they are afforded a kind of prestige and credibility in society that is almost theological. These are places.
And like the church, they also have their own nation, essentially their own nation state that allows them to issue visas.
Exactly. And they have been, a Harvard professor got busted early on in COVID, and I don't know what happened to him, with dubious transactions with the Chinese government. These places come up with our laws, or not our laws, our sort of algorithmic practices having to do with disinformation. They are think tanks now, manufacturing all sorts of social programs, all sorts of technologies, both hard technologies and social technologies for the control and the governance of the United States. That they should have a spotlight shined on them is, I think, wonderful. I wrote a whole book in 2006, Lost in the Meritocracy, about Princeton and the ways in which it sort of formed me and other people and was drifting in a certain direction. To me, this is the culmination of some of the concerns that I had then. Harvard, where do I get paid back by the government for my grocery bills? No. But I can get a loan for my Harvard tuition, which allows, of course, Harvard to charge way more tuition because people are buying it with leverage. It has tax-free status. It, like you say, has all these privileges in terms of who it brings and admits and so on. And
which, as you pointed out, is a huge part of their revenue structure.
A huge part of their revenue structure. They're able
the
to
foreign
build this.
students who pay the full freight cash.
Yes, they do.
Right.
And so, all in all, there isn't one rule that the rest of us have to live by, including, I'm afraid, civil rights laws, because it isn't clear that Harvard has ever really abided by the Supreme Court ruling that struck down its racially preferential admissions standards. Harvard doesn't have to live by the rules that the rest of us do, financially, socially, and in any other way. And whether or not they can make a case for themselves, and they should be able to make a great one, being Harvard, right? Home of the Harvard Law School, home of this law school that probably puts as many Supreme Court justices as any other law school, second only to Yale, perhaps. This is a massively powerful interface nexus in our social and governmental matrix, and we get to look at it now. And yes, Trump may be stumbling and bumbling and overreaching in some ways, and a loud honking voice in the quiet common room of the Ivy League. But I can think of no better meditation tool for understanding society as it exists now.
Yeah, I'm beyond. I think conflicted is even the wrong word, because Harvard was one of the arch villains of the digital censorship regime that we spent the previous 3 years talking about. It's the recipient of millions of dollars, public dollars, to do censorship research. The former head of Harvard Shorenstein Center, Joan Donovan, was really one of the primary voices who came up with the idea that deplatforming is working, and that removing people like Donald Trump from the internet was a strategy that, in the short run, was something that we could and should do. And so, yeah, our public money was going not only for censorship research, but for the justification for removing people of considerable political import from the internet, and that's not just politicians, but also media figures and beyond. Also, as you say, look, the headline: Trump bans foreign students from entering Harvard. It's not a good look. I mean, it freaks me out, that idea. But also, I don't like the idea that Harvard is sort of, in an unsupervised way, they had this SVEP program that allows them to just issue visas willy-nilly to anybody and they want. It's one of about a dozen different subsidies that these schools enjoy that just hasn't been examined forever. Like, the fact that they don't pay taxes on their investment funds, and as you say, the unlimited government-backed lending for tuition and so on. The fact that they violated non-discrimination laws openly for years, and probably still are. So all of that makes it's at the best possible way of looking at it is that it's two rule-breaking antagonists at the same time. So
the question is, what is a university like Harvard? And I don't think we've asked that honestly for a long time. In some ways, a university like Harvard is a think tank. In other ways, it's a defense research institute. In a lot of ways, it's a security and social discipline institute, and has acted as such recently. How do we govern? It's also a manufacturer of corporate profits, because I think what people fail to understand is how much money comes out of the synergy between these major universities and corporate America. And I'm not talking about Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates having gone to Harvard, though there's, something to be, I think, talked about there. Professors there invent medical products, defense products, electronic, computing products, and so on, that are that exist in a kind of hazy place between capitalism and state power, because a lot of it is done with grants. In other words, these grants that go to these universities end up in commercial products a lot of the time that make massive profits. And I think we might want to, even from a left-wing perspective, and that's what's so amazing, is that the left has rallied to Harvard, the most exclusive, capitalist-friendly, foreign policy,
militaristic
institution in the United States, and now suddenly they're, some kind of, damsel in distress. I love that we're doing this. Listen, my daughter went there. My wife went to Harvard. I'm uniquely and intimately acquainted with its vibe, its culture, its story. It's a story that, if in a time of woke social justice, goes back to the least just times in our history. And it's interesting that just a couple of years ago, we were wondering whether these places should change their name. Over at Princeton, they were removing Woodrow Wilson's image and name from everything they could. How odd that they went from being a target of what we might call woke activism to suddenly the darling.
Yeah, they're the avatars of social justice now. Suddenly,
yeah.
Which is just par for the course for this period. Trump is the true north for all things, whether it's hydroxychloroquine or Israel, Gaza, the First Amendment. Doesn't matter. Whatever he's on the other side of, people are for the other thing. So Harvard somehow has turned itself around, and much like the totally once despised NSA and FBI and CIA suddenly became embraced in the first Trump presidency. Now we have all these other institutions that are becoming heroic again, which is just bizarre. It's interesting to watch. So
that about them, which is genuinely heroic, will survive the interrogation. That about them, which is dubious, perhaps shouldn't survive it. And other aspects of them should be at least understood, if neither approved nor demonized.
Yeah. So that's kind of the backdrop for this novel we're going to talk about. Harvard has always occupied an important part in American history, but I think this book, The Quiet American, marks the beginning of a new stage in what the American university meant, not only to this country but to the world, because after World War II is when we saw, with Kennedy's best and the brightest, there was this concept of the new expert managerial class, the university trained person who knew everything, who was well read and was going to run the bureaucracies of the world in a new way. And this was the replacement for kind of old school European colonialism, was the American exceptionalism that was going to be managed by people who came from places like Harvard, and that's really the backdrop for this book, The Quiet American, which was written by uh, Graham Greene, one of the great authors, I think, great novelists of all time, and also had incredible range too. We'll get to that because he's a writer of comedies as well as spy thrillers and other things. But he was in Vietnam for at least 2 years. Green was a spy, in addition to being a correspondent for papers like Le Figaro in the very early 50s, and then he spent parts of a few winters in Vietnam, and then he published
in
this
the early 1950s.
in the early
Before most Americans knew there was any American involvement there at all, really.
oh, long before
Yeah.
this was he got there in 1951. um, he was there really during the period of the French colonial war in Vietnam, which preceded the American war. And then he published in 1955 this book, The Quiet American, which was, and I don't know, Walter, if you want to do the sort of frame summary of this, but the three main characters in the story are a British journalist who's the narrator, who's clearly a stand-in for Green on multiple levels. His name is Thomas Fowler. He's a journalist who writes for a paper that he has to file to Paris for.
And he's a British journalist, meaning he's lazy. Okay?
Exactly.
You know, anybody who knows the literature of British journalism, you know, from Scoop by Waugh to whatever it will be, knows that there are two things British journalists specialize in. Not actually being there when they write the story.
Which is referenced in the book. Yep.
Right. And hangovers, womanizing, bad habits. And so he is a classic British journalist in that sense, and he tells the story.
Yeah, and he's I had a British editor when I was an overseas correspondent at the Moscow Times, and he had a little nameplate that he kept on his desk. Actually, it was a cartoon that said this, but it was a picture of a British journalist typing, and then there was a nameplate that said "Pissed Old Hack" in front of it. So Fowler is kind of the prototypical pissed old hack, except he's not just pissed. He's an opium smoker, and he lives in Vietnam, and he's madly in love with a 20-year-old Vietnamese woman named Phong, but can't marry her because he's got a wife back in England who won't give him a divorce. Now, into this idyllic picture is introduced a character named Alden Pyle, who arrives in Vietnam straight from Harvard, essentially, and he's got a head full of ideas. And Walter, I mean,
Well, here, let me read. This is how straight from Harvard Pyle comes. He said, perhaps only days ago, he had been walking across the Common in Boston, his arms full of books he had been reading in advance on the Far East and the problems of China. So, not by accident, very prominently and from the beginning, Green and Fowler, his narrator, his mouthpiece, focus on the fact that this guy learned everything he knows about Vietnam and everything he knows about Asia and China and maybe even life at college. And so this is the story of a young Harvard man who's read a few, big tomes, unleashed on a country that is suffering a communist uprising against its colonial governors, France, and a series of other uprisings within the context of that major war that have to do with sort of gangland and tribal and factional violence. So here comes Mr. Preppy. here come Mr. Preppy, the guy on the cover of the book, having just gotten out of class, and he has the power of the American government behind him, and he's working for some sort of oddly named, euphemistic.
Yeah, it's like the economic aid, something or other. I forget
Right.
what the exact term is. It's basically USAID.
Right, but Green never says it outright because he's British, and this is a British narrator. But the guy's a spy.
Yeah,
You know, he in 1950, whenever the book is set, early 50s. I'm not sure that the CIA had, you know, OSS had fully become the CIA. I think it had.
it
But
had. Yeah,
yeah, but
Yep.
he is a American intelligence agent there to cause trouble, and with the full faith and arm power of the U.S. somewhere in the distance behind him. And this old guy, this opium smoking, womanizing, lazy journalist who likes nothing more than to, you know, wake up with his mistress every morning after not having sex with her because he can't get it up half
because
the time.
because yes, the
Right.
smoking impacts it. Yeah,
Right. And so and so you know, it quickly becomes a love triangle immediately. You're told in the first chapter between this weary, fatigued Roman Catholic married English journalist and this ruthless but innocent recent Harvard grad who's there to spread democracy. And God save us, because as the book will show, the innocent and the well intentioned American is not quiet but deadly.
yeah, yeah, and well, first of all, we were talking off air before we started. I want to start with this before we get into some of these passages, but and just to mention, in a little bit, we're going to open up the floor for questions, and there's going to be a way that you can ask. And if you want to actually appear on screen, that can happen. If you want to just ask a question in the chat, you can do it that way too. But
If you want to imagine the quiet America, just imagine Jake Sullivan. Okay, remember Jake
exactly,
Sullivan?
yes.
It's that simple.
Right. He's Jake Sullivan, and you know, you mentioned this sort of well, look, part of a big part of this whole book is this British old world condescension towards the anti-intellectual nature of this new powerful American creature. And
Right.
you can see this. There's this passage. Let's just throw it on screen. This is number 2, I think. This is where he lists Pyle's books, and there's really 2 things that happen here. One, he has the complete works of somebody called York Harding. Are we able to get that on screen? Number 2. Oh, anyway. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, so I went across to his bookcase and examined 2 rows of books: Pyle's library, The Advance of Red China, The Challenge to Democracy, The Role of the West. These, I suppose, were the complete works of York Harding. York Harding is kind of a running joke in this book. He's like, he's an early version of what we would now call a pundit. He's basically like David Brooks or Thomas Friedman or somebody like that. And the Green character is sort of dripping with condescension because that's all this person reads. There's no poetry, there's no literature, there's no nothing else. Then it says, tucked away behind the anthology, there was a paperbacked book called The Physiology of Marriage. Perhaps he was studying sex as he had studied the East on paper.
Right.
So this is a person who he has no soul. He's got no game, like in terms of, you know, romancing women. He doesn't. The only thing he knows are these sort of quasi-professional tracks about things.
He's a virgin, and you know, here we have Graham Greene, not Donald Trump, much more sophisticated than Donald Trump, leveling some of the same criticisms that Donald Trump might actually at the Harvard man, which is, you know everything from books, but you've never lived. You have no common sense. You have no experience of the rough and tumble of the real world. I mean, as a critique by the old world of the new world, this book is unparalleled because even though the deadly sins are all crammed into Fowler's little skull, he represents the continuity of human experience, looking at this fabulous new, rich, ruthless monster called the American spy, the American attaché. And you know from the beginning that there's going to be nothing but trouble from Pyle and nothing but sadness, pain for Fowler.
Right.
Fowler
Right.
is, in other words, there's a line where Fowler says, well, of Pyle, well, he was in his element with the whole universe to improve. And
Right.
is that not America? And has anything changed? These books could be the end of history, or the coming American century. They could be the books that the Biden or the Clintons or the Obamas or the Bushes put out every summer for an understanding of our world and so on. Nothing has changed. This is as modern a look at American foreign affairs and the sentiments and philosophies that drive them as you can get. And it's 75 years old or 70 years old.
Yeah, and he's you can see that a lot of what this is basically just Green, who is an old world character himself, was a spy himself. He was the deputy to the infamous Kim Philby. He flirted with communism when he was at Oxford, not Cambridge, but Oxford. And he dislikes Americans on many levels. In every one of Green's novels, the American is a buffoon. And sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it's just mean. But here, it's a full-blown, very complicated, insightful portrait of a type of character who was about to take over the world, and
Yes.
whether he knew that or not is not clear. I think, but he completely nailed this portrait of this person who had absolute self-confidence in how they were going to do everything.
He could actually, Pyle could be the young George Bush Sr. Absolutely. Pyle, who we learn very quickly in the novel, dies. We learn right away. And in fact, the structure of the book is a kind of investigation of why he died, what he died for, if anything, and what role Fowler played in the death, even practically or in a weird way spiritually. It is a forensic examination of an American character and a kind of guilty old world conscience that, though it deplores the new, it also envies it in something the same way the cuckold envies the young stud.
Yeah.
And that is made explicit throughout the book. That in
How
some
can you
ways,
compete with respectability? He talks about.
yes, yeah, it's the libido of America, the erotic power. It's just raw strength that this old hand is both sickened by and critical of, but also slightly in awe of in a helpless, primitive way. And so that complicated tone is really the beauty of this book, to see weary experience looking at ruthless or brutal innocence with a very fragile woman in the middle. A woman who could go either way and is, in a sense, the prize, just like the colonial countries, just like Vietnam
Exactly.
is the prize.
Exactly.
And it's not that the book is overly or heavily symbolic. It's a very human, detailed, melodramatic story of love and war and so on. But it sets up its schema pretty well. She is Vietnam.
Yeah, she is Vietnam, and the personality of Alden Pyle. And if you've seen the movie, by the way, I haven't. I haven't seen the original in a while, so I can't even remember who played Pyle in the original. But in the remake, I think that was made in the early 2000s, Brendan Fraser played Pyle and did a really good job, I think, because he captured his sort of puffy puppy dog virility, but like kind of stupidity at the same time.
He's a preppy.
He's a preppy.
He's a big preppy who plays, touch football out on the vineyard or whatever.
And this is just another scout badge quest that he's on, and he doesn't know the difference or recognize or admit the difference. Before we got on, you were saying that if you were going to teach students how to write a novel, this would be one of the 5 books that you would choose. I'm curious why you would pick this one.
Well, I didn't come to that conclusion until I started rereading it, probably for the 4th time. And I just, in the first couple of chapters, was struck by 3 things. The physical details and the sensuality of, the characters and the setting are absolutely perfectly and economically rendered. Not a sentence is wasted here. And it's not a kind of pretentious, flat, telegraphic style like Hemingway, for example. It's very witty, it's very fluid, but it's always hitting the mark. It's just like watching darts hit bullseyes over and over in a way that just sticks every landing. It is paced perfectly. He mixes kind of general observations about life, about Americans, about people, about women, about men, in a almost effortless way into very common scenes of dancing in a brothel, sitting in an embassy, having tea in a hotel, etc. So,
with the dancing, there's a great line where Fong says he dances very badly, but he seems like a nice, reliable man. And anyway, that was a key part of the story. But go ahead.
Right. Well, and so I would say that in terms of sort of economy and wit and the use of imagery, not just physical imagery, but kind of spiritual imagery. At one point, he says about someone, he looked like a face on TV, which is Graham Greene's way of saying this person is a spiritual vacuum. Kind of, and he's talking about a diplomat who has a kind of a hale, hearty way of dealing with things, but it seems to be rather empty inside. And so it's on many levels just absolutely efficient. In terms of storytelling, he gets you right away, almost like a TV show. You know that there's a mystery, there's a death, there's a triangle, a romantic triangle, and so you're hooked at the most basic soap opera level almost instantly. But finally, what I think is most salutary and educational for a young writer is that he doesn't push anything too far. He lets the story be. He's not telling you what it means. He's not getting ahead of it. He's not going off on long lyrical tour de force style descriptions. He's just telling you what happened. And as it develops, line by line, conversation by conversation, incident by incident, you start to feel a whole world is being built around you. I mean, you are in colonial Vietnam in a helpless, sensory, and completely captivating way. And you can't really, they talk about books you can't put down because they're suspenseful. You can't put this one down because you don't want to break the dream spell of this setting.
Right. Yep. Yeah. That's absolutely true. And his plots are amazing. Also, they're different. The structures are different every time. But this one is done in a very unusual way. I thought, where the main character's dead basically in the beginning. One of the main characters. So it starts, and it's not a spoiler because you learn this in chapter 1 or 2. I forget it is. Pyle dies, and really the suspense of the story is trying to figure out whether Fowler had something to do with it, and through the unfolding of that plot, that's you're sort of dragged forward to try to figure out exactly how far Fowler would have gone to try to keep Fong, to try to prevent Pyle from succeeding. And it's an unusual kind of suspense plot device, but he had an incredible range as a writer. Like some of his books are just flat out almost like screwball comedies. They're like the literary version of Airplane or Top Secret.
Right.
He wrote a book called Our Man in Havana, which is utterly ridiculous. It's basically it's a spy story about a vacuum cleaner salesman gets recruited and sends MI6 plans for invented plans for a giant vacuum cleaner that they believe. There's another story where the honorary consul, where these radical leftist kidnappers kidnap the wrong person and don't realize that he has no value and don't know what to do with him. But also another thing that's unique about Green is that he is able to kind of drive the story forward with big chunks of prose and text, but also entirely with dialogue when he felt like it. So if anybody's a movie buff here, if you've seen the movie The Third Man, that's a Green scenario that he wrote,
yeah.
I think, after the screenplay, right?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how that movie developed. I want to tell stories about people and places that cross over with these things. I used to live when I was in London after I went to Oxford for a couple of years and saw the young versions of Fowler, people like Boris Johnson, who himself became a kind of, glad-handing, heavy-drinking journalist. I went and lived down in London with an old film director, and his name was Robert Dunbar, and he'd worked on The Quiet American, on The Third Man back, in Vienna right after the war, one of the greatest British films. And, he'd known Green, and he'd known Alexander Korda, the director. And it's really, I think, if you're going to understand this novel, important to understand the milieu from which it came. The British gentleman, the Oxfordian, of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, was a kind of character that we don't have in America. They serve the Queen from the moment they're born. They serve the realm. They serve the empire. They don't worry too much about money. They don't worry too much about material things.
They're terrible with money, as a matter of fact.
They're terrible with money. They might have bad teeth. They don't worry about their health the way an American up-and-coming, wanting to be rich person might. They're a little bit of a mess, but they're also set in place by the class structure and by the educational system and by social destiny to defend the realm. And so they become spies, novelists, people like Ian Fleming or Graham Greene, and they have a kind of worldly experience that is very rare in specialized America. See, in some ways, what Greene is criticizing here, as far as America, is the specialist, the person who has learned not by experience and not by sort of general, general inhalation of life's and history's tragedies, how to do something particular. But the British gentleman is a whole other creature. And I don't know, we can see them a little bit in the character of somebody like Boris Johnson, I guess, or, some of the British prime ministers over the years, but he is a foreign character, and his basic knock on America, Greens, Fowlers, and the British upper classes in general, is that we're just too new to the scene, and we believe in good. We haven't seen that the best laid plans always come to nothing.
We haven't read Ozymandias.
Yes,
Right.
we haven't failed. We haven't sinned. We haven't gotten ourselves dirty through the years, administering, colonies, adventuring, and we don't have a sense of the tragic. And I think this whole book, as you read it and as people follow along here, will be a story of America gaining a sense of the tragic. I don't know that we've gained it yet. We still rush off on our adventures, think, oh, we're going to make Iraq into a democracy. Oh, we're going to, bring Ukraine into a utopian digital new society if we can just get rid of those Russians. If the Russians are even older and more tragic in a way than the British, this is something a little bit on the medium scale. And it really helps to see your own society, I think, through the eyes of those who are most critical of it and skeptical and dubious of it. And that's what this book gives us a chance to do. See Americans from the outside, from the perspective of a cultured, ancient, tragic, and rather superior civilization, or one at least that considers itself to be.
Yeah, so we basically get, I guess, with today's show, we can get really through the first part of the book, and the essence of this sort of first half of it is that Pyle is introduced. We learn that he's dead. Then we get into a flashback, and we learn how. And as a reader points out, I was mispronouncing the name. It's Foon, not Fong. That he was living happily with Foon. Then there was a moment where suddenly Pyle does something that's sort of weirdly old world. He kind of confronts Fowler and tells him that he's in love with Foon, and just sort of announces to him. He actually travels all the way up to some city where he's reporting to tell him this, because he doesn't want he doesn't want to be like what's the word I'm looking for? He doesn't want to do something dishonorable. And then to complicate matters, he let's put it number 12 if we can, because this is so obnoxious. He tells him afterwards that he's taken the news that he has a rival with great strength. And he says, Thomas, I want you to know that what I think of the way you've taken all this, I think you've been swell. There's just no other word for it. And then afterwards, he sends him a letter saying essentially the same thing about how swell he's been. And what's obnoxious about the letter is that it sort of assumes that Fowler is going to lose this competition. Over the love interest, and you can see the anger in Fowler building, and that's kind of where the first half of the story breaks off, is with this declaration that there's a rivalry, which is bizarre, but you can see all the different emotions that Fowler has, and that Pyle will never get, basically.
So, as I said earlier, one way you can think of this book is as two spy agencies or two diplomatic services incarnated in characters, in representative characters, fighting over the woman that is Vietnam. The elusive, fragile, extremely tough, cunning, all sorts of characteristics are given to the character, and I think by association to Vietnam. On the one hand, Fowler, represents, I think, the very treacherous, old style of spying. You know, the kind that even though he's a journalist, he sort of waits for things to happen. He doesn't try to make them happen. He observes. At one point, he says he's such a pure journalist that he has no opinions on anything. And
Oh, yeah.
this reminded me of you, Matt. You know, he said even to have an opinion is to try to change things. You know, he's a fatalist. In other words, he represents the kind of diplomacy that waits for God to act and then comes in and takes advantage of it. On the other hand, Jake Sullivan, the American, who I really reminds me of The Great Gatsby. If there's a book that this reminds me of more than any, it's The Great Gatsby. There are so many similarities. It's one character talking about the other after he has died. It's it has to do with sort of American innocence. Pyle really reminds me of Gatsby. You know, of course you can change the past. You know,
Right.
The way Gatsby says "old sport" is the way Pyle says "swell."
Except it's flipped. Fitzgerald had exactly the opposite view that Green had. Like, right?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but what I'm going to say is that, how can I put it? In these two rivals, you have these characteristics: old world, no, cynical, you know, innocent, fatalistic, optimistic, but their names, I think, tell the tale. And you know, when you're as somebody who's written novels, naming a character is a big deal. Okay, not to make too much of it, but you don't pick the wrong name, and you don't do it by random. You don't do it by throwing dice. Do it at random. So who's Fowler? Fowler means a hunter of birds. Okay, that's literally what it means. He's a womanizer. Pyle, and it's a British joke that I think people will think I've been pushed too far, but I promise you, Green is smirking over it, means hemorrhoid. The British word for hemorrhoids is piles. And what hemorrhoids symbolize to the British is sitting too much, is kind of being too concentrated, too serious, too stuffy. And Fowler, the hunter of birds, versus the hemorrhoidal, ultra serious Harvard graduate, is, I think, the joke that he has set up in the beginning. And we're going to see who wins. We're going to see who lives and dies. We're going to see what happens to Vietnam. That's where everybody who hasn't started reading should put their head at the moment. And the questions to ask are, is, I think, Fowler fair to Pyle? Is his bitterness, is his jealousy, is his impotence, is his tragic sense, in a way, so full of resentment and so much a thing of the past that it is bitterness, not wisdom? And on Pyle's side, is his optimism, is his strength, is his desire to see democratic values and the American spirit and so on perpetuated across the globe? Is there anything noble about it? Because when you look at it in the book, it's hard to see anything noble about it. It looks naive, violent, self-serving, savage. But obviously America doesn't see itself that way, and it still doesn't. So what is it about this project that is so obviously doomed and stupid in the book that we keep falling for?
Well, I think one of the things, the constant criticism, and there's an epigram at the beginning that I think he takes from Byron and Don Juan, about good intentions, being the most dangerous thing of all. And he's one of the things he's clearly saying is that this combination in Pyle of the true believer who is full of gusto and energy and completely without any capacity for self-doubt. Um, that comes with a total absence of local knowledge or interest in the outside world or intellectual curiosity or any of the things that distinguish the old British gentleman, as you put it. So he is an energetic doer who's completely ignorant and incapable of competence, and that's a bad combination when it comes with money, weapons, and other things. In a foreign country. The other thing I would just mention, you mentioned The Great Gatsby. There's another book that's much less well known, but that also reminds me of this. It's by an author named Yuri Alesha, who wrote a book called Envy, and it was written by. It's sort of a satire written by somebody who works at a sausage factory after the Russian Revolution, and he's got a boss who's just he's very physically dynamic, kind of overweight but full of vigor, and he's really into making sausages at an incredible rate and pace, and he's sort of fused in with the Soviet production system, and this lesser employee hates him with an abiding passion. Can't stand how well he's received and how much everybody responds to him so positively, and that's similar to this. Fowler is a broken down, opiate addict in his 50s, who is just secretly resentful of this young, virile, single American who's willing to marry this woman, and as you say, it's a good question. Is he being fair to Pyle?
Yeah, exactly. Is this a caricature of the American that's based in bitterness and really goes no further? Is this in some way the British Empire, which has just kind of come to a crashing halt after World War II, is about to completely disintegrate, envying the rise of the new empire, but without properly appreciating what it's doing right? There are moments, and I think any American who reads this book, when you will feel defensive about Fowler's criticisms of Pyle. You'll mostly laugh, you'll mostly feel they are just, you'll mostly see the preppy, Harvard, arrogant, douchebag perfectly described in ways that are,
it's uncanny how the same this is to today, but go ahead.
Yeah. But every once in a while you'll go, yes, but how come Fowler doesn't see why he's succeeding? He might not succeed in Vietnam, and we know in a way he won't. But why he's succeeding around the world. Why he had to come to the rescue just the other year of the British islands in World War II. Is it not just unfair, but is it an inadequate portrait of American vigor? Does it fail not just in terms of capturing the character's virtues, but does it somehow give short shrift to American virtue, if there is such a thing? And testing that question as you read the book, I think, is the great intellectual task before anyone who sets out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't quite tell how you feel about it, because with some of his other books, you know how you feel about it because you're laughing all the way through. Like Our Man in Havana, I know that book works because it's funny all the way through, right? Like you're laughing out loud. Some of his other books, he wrote a lot of books about Catholicism that were heavy, and but this one I think is actually profound. I think it was politically predictive in ways like sort of like 1984, another book that we reference a lot. So, but did he mean it to be? And
it's also,
mm-hmm.
It's also a book about Puritanism. I think his final criticism and his specific criticism, embodied in the fake name York Harding, is that America is a Protestant, waspish, stuffy, puritanical society, whereas I think he sees both Vietnam and the world through a Roman Catholic lens, as a mysterious, elusive, tragic,
Eroticized.
erotic, sensual place. Graham, over and over in his books, characterizes Americans as having one problem: they don't feel pleasure. You know, in The Comedians, a book about
Ugh.
some missionaries in Haiti, he makes fun of the vegetarianism of the Americans, and their and
The
I've
Midwestern vegetarianism.
and I've met these people, man. I've met these people who want to go around the world and bring healthy eating, and in a way, we're in a healthy eating phase right now in America, with RFK and our resolution to get back in shape, and America, where diet seems to be the greatest pinnacle of human, a successful diet is the pinnacle of human achievement. And that question is, what wrong with America that we can't feel pleasure, that we don't really live in the world, that we don't really live in the flesh. We live for these ideas, democracy, freedom, etc. All of which, when we impose them on the complex world, can only succeed through violence.
Right, and we don't see that, but he can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so that's kind of the first half of this book, and frankly, we don't know how this is going to work out, but we thought we would give it a shot. We thought we would open the floor a little bit and see if anybody wants to get into the discussion. If you're viewing on Riverside, I think there's a way you can enter a comment, and if our mystery producer has a question for us, you can throw that on screen anytime, but you have to actually appear on screen for that one. If you want to just ask a question in the chat, you can do that also, so just let us know. But in the meantime, Walter, what else is there about this book that makes it different from some of his other books? Because he wrote books that he derisively called entertainments. This was not one of those. I think this was much more. He was trying to make a big statement with this book. I thought, in comparison, and similar to books like Human Factor. Some of his others are just like roller coaster rides. They're fun. They're crazy, and they're polished. But this one was dark and meaningful. Oh, here we go.